It's always nice to be introduced as an expert. Although I must already tell you, we are still heavily into the learning zone, which I will talk about a little bit later. So let me share my screen with you. And guide you a little bit through the process that we have encountered in working with Warp. So hopefully it will start to present. Here we go. Hopefully I said, oh, it's loading. Yes, here we go. So because the reason we started to collaborate with Warp just before COVID was the fact that on the one hand, what we discovered, and we are that's a case with with the guy you see on the top left side of the screen, and myself, we are soft skill trainers, and what we discovered is that soft skills are always important but never urgent. So the question we asked ourselves together with Warp is, how can we innovate the approach towards soft skill training, and specifically role playing in the workshops that we deliver. So for that, I'm going to share a little bit on the vision on learning that we have and the way we use VR as a learning tool before diving into the design and collaboration with Warp VR. And in the end, I will show you a little sneak preview of one of the modules we developed and some of the feedback we received from our participants and clients. And of course, then the stage is open for questions that you might have. So we were inspired by a guy with the name of Eduardo Brinceno. Maybe some of you heard about him, maybe not, but if you have a chance, look at his TED Talk, where he introduced the fact that although we always try to do the best in our life, there is a tendency that no matter how much time we invest in it, we stagnate in that approach. I always compare it to my skill of typing, blind typing, that I already probably do for more than 25 years. And the first 6 months, I improved dramatically. In 1991, I still remember, I received my first laptop, a Canon, which weighed more than 15 kilos. And then I started to learn how to type. But for the last 24 and a half years, there was no improvement anymore. And why is that? Why is that I stagnate in that skill? That's an interesting question. And for that, he talks a lot about the learning and the performance zone. And so in the learning zone, the goal for us is to improve. And for that improvement, we concentrate on skills we haven't mastered yet. So we have to make mistakes. We have to experiment in that phase before we start to apply it in the performance zone. And the challenge in any learning approach or workshop is, how do you get people into the learning zone? How can we have people to deliberately practice those skills and then start to apply them in the performance zone? And in the performance zone, you will experience that some things will work, some things will not. And then you have to reflect back and take it back to the learning zone. But for that, we need to create an environment where the stakes are low. And stakes are low, meaning that if we make mistakes, it has to have little to no consequences. And for that, we also need an environment with little to no social risk. And maybe if you have been in role plays before, practicing your own soft skills, you might have felt the social pressure when a trainer or an actor asks you to step in front of the group and practice a certain skill. And maybe you do not feel that it is okay to fail. Maybe you had that feeling to say, why does this trainer ask me? Can I not escape this room? Or if you step forward to the stage, do you step into the learning zone, or do you try to show that you already apply and master that skill? And so we have to also create an environment where it's okay to experiment and okay to fail. And we need to link learning and performance zone back together again. And in our view, that has been broken. So for that, we have developed using virtual reality, an approach where we never use training days anymore. So we just come in for workshops for 2 to 3 hours, where we link, after a start, role-playing in VR with meaningful conversations. And so what we have learned is it never works to only use VR in soft skills. We have to also link it with a meaningful conversation in a team or in a group of participants. That's also something that's really working. So how is it that we use virtual reality as a tool to step into the learning zone? So for that, we started to collaborate with Warp Virtual Reality, Warp VR. We still do. We've created several scenarios with them based on certain design principles, on a process, and on some of the components we always use in our scenarios. So for one, we deliberately choose to always work with generic storylines. So we never customize. Why? Because we don't want to step into the discussion that certain situation is not specifically aligned for that specific organization. It's about the soft skill. It's about how to deliver constructive feedback. It's about how to masterful listen. It's not about this is not designed for my specific world. We also focus on experimenting. And so we challenge participants not to only go through scenarios as quickly as possible. We challenge them to also choose an option that they normally would not choose, and then discover what happens in the response that they then will experience. What we also do is we combine theory with practice. So we have a role play, but we also have a lecture where we explain the theoretical framework behind the skill. And so theory linked with practice. And after each workshop, also to stimulate that meaningful conversation, we create handouts, which is more, I would say, a summary of the lecture that people have just experienced. And like I said, we apply virtual reality in real life workshops, not more than 2 to 3 hours. So focus on the design process of a scenario containing of 7 steps, I would say, is first we start to develop a storyline. And we always want to have high quality professional output. So we work with a scenario writer, a professional scenario writer. We work, of course, with the Warp VR experts, and we work with subject matter experts, being maybe us as content traders, but also people from the work from the sector or the specific organization people work for. Once we have brainstormed the storyline, we then discuss it. We create it in Warp Studio, and then we start to cast the location and actors. We shoot the scenario, we do post-production, and then we launch it. And Warp VR has a specific process for designing. Maybe some of you have already experienced it. And you see some Dutch sentences here, but it's more about, it always starts with setting the scenario drivers. And so what's the topic, what's the learning goal, what's the target audience that it's addressed to, and why is it important, or what is the business reason for this scenario? So together with that scenario writer, with Warp VR, and with some subject matter experts, we start to brainstorm about this first step. After that, we start to define the story elements. So discussing the main characters, which is important for our briefing to actors. What is the role that we want them to express and play in that role play? What is the main need for that character? What is the environment of the story, and what are some of the other characters that might be involved in the story? And once we have discussed this all, we then bring the story to life with outlining the storyline in the end. And so what are the interactions, what is the climax or the end result, and what is the solution that we want to see? And so what is the actual skill that we want someone to have been trained or experienced during that playing the role play. And once we have done that, and don't try to look at the details, but you see here the complexity of translating a storyline into Warp VR. And so this is more to show you that all the the links between all the different scenarios or scenes that we have created. And what are the components that you have just seen in the Warp Studio? Is we always start, of course, with an introduction, because we use generic scenarios. We have to bring people into the background of the situation that they will start to experience. So setting the scene. We also always use immediate feedback loops stolen from sports. So once people have chosen an option that is not very effective, they can choose to immediately get feedback from a trainer to understand why this option is not so effective. What we also have included in our later scenarios is what we call a perspective change. So you suddenly step into the shoes of the other person to start to understand not only what they say, but also what they think. Where is their response or reaction coming from? From what background information? So it gives you a lot of insight if you change the perspective of the other person. And what we also use is, because I already told that reflection or meaningful conversation is important, we also incorporated that into the scenarios. So the trainer also, in the end of a scenario, will start to ask reflection questions to start that reflection process with the participant immediately after playing that role play. And then, like I said, we also have this lecture, the theoretical framework of the scenario that we have designed. And then we dive into the production, which is always probably for me personally the most fun part of the whole experience, is to really see or create the end result, which is great, at least for me to experience. Working with actors, seeing their professionality on how quickly they take up the characters, the text, and translate that into a fantastic role play. And then it all ends with an end result. So let's see and give you a little bit of sneak preview of one of the scenarios that we have designed or co-created with Warp VR. Here we go.
You're about to have a meeting with Brian, the recruiter of Company X. A mutual connection introduced you, so you've never met Brian before, but he was willing to meet as a favor to his friend. It's important to find out what his personal priorities are and to get introduced to the decision makers in his company. You've already read that sustainability is high on the company's agenda, but they still have lots of room for growth and innovation. Your startup company, ProGreen, helps companies transition to sustainable business using innovative products. Let me introduce the award-winning cup to you. Good luck with your meeting with Brian.
Welcome. Have a seat.
Thanks so much for meeting me.
Of course, no problem. I have about 20 minutes until my next meeting starts.
Wow, a signed picture of Roger Federer? Where did you get that?
I saw Roger Federer speak a couple of years ago in Geneva. he gave this great presentation on how to recruit talent and inspire the young generation.
How impressive. It reminds me of the day I met David Beckham.
Yeah, I don't really like soccer. I just feel like those players aren't the best role models. I definitely would not use one of them as an example.
Showing interest is not a trick. Be genuinely interested in what Brian is telling you. It's about him, not about you. Welcome. In this lecture, we will take you through the 5 steps of the strategic sales conversation. We have created handouts available to you as a reminder. Enjoy the lecture. A strategic sales conversation consists of 5 steps. 1, connect. 2, explore strategy. 3, explore need. 4, link the product to strategy and need. And 5, make the added value specific. Or experience an example how to explore strategy in more detail.
The temporary employment strategy can be characterized as transactional. You arrange manpower and the client pays for it. But I get the impression you work differently. What are your principles when looking at temporary employment?
Well, good question. We do approach this differently. We consider employment in the broadest sense. Having a job stimulates personal development and social participation. It positively influences your financial situation and even social status.
Okay, so this was a little like sneak preview of one of the modules having a strategic sales conversation, including the role play, the feedback, immediate feedback, the setting the scene, the lecture, and also in the lecture we always include examples to show, I would say, good and not so good situations or examples or approaches. So in the end, what we see, the experience we have so far is we always have to combine, I would say, role-playing using virtual reality, creating this safe environment to experiment and make mistakes, together with a meaningful conversation in the team. And for some reason, and we still have not figured out the real reason why, having people in a room with the same experience, playing the same role play in their own pace, making their own mistakes without anyone noticing it, opens up an environment where difficult topics are easier to discuss among each other within the team, with your teammates. And so you see some feedback of the sessions we had so far. Of course, it's innovative. Of course, it's new, but it also saves a lot of time, and it creates an environment where teams actually starting to really discuss the topics that are in the team but are never discussed. And that's, I think one of the major strengths of using virtual reality in soft skill training. Saves time, and it really opens up a meaningful conversation in the team. So that's what I would like to share with you today, and hopefully, Anna, we might have some questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Ed, for these insights about creating soft skills experiences. I think we have a couple of questions on the side. I can, I believe, also share them on the screen. So the first one would be, how long does it take you to do all of the outlining and planning, would you say on average, and does it get easier over time?
Does it get easier over time? Yeah, that's good. So I would say the overall, in general, planning is the 3 steps I showed you. So the three, I would say, worksheets is approximately, depending a little bit on your experience, of course, 3 times 2 hours, and you can do that easily, do that virtually. So with a scenario writer, with an SME, with us, and with Warp VR. So that's 6 hours. I think the majority of work is translating that whole concept into Warp Studio, and especially finding, I would say, the different pathways. So that discussion might take up maybe, or take yourself going through it, maybe like a day, 2 days, working hours, so 8 to 16 working hours. Then production, depending on the size of scenario, typically takes a day, a full day, maybe 2, but that depends on the amount of scenes, of course, that you have, and also the experience of the actors you use. Some actors are very experienced in role-playing in front of a camera. Some have to get used to it a little bit. And then the post-production also takes time. So I would say, in general, working hours, probably a week. And post-production hours, of course, yeah, that takes computer power, more or less, to create the scenario. So I would say, yeah, depends a little bit also on the availability of your computers. But working hours, I would say a week for one scenario.
Okay. And does it get easier over time?
Does it get easier? Probably, yes, of course. But like I say, really going through the details and finding, I would say, the little deviations. It's very easy to say this is the best answer, the right answer, and this is very wrong. But in soft skills, it's not so black and white. And so you really have to discuss together, maybe this is an approach that might also work, but it's not the best approach. So that what's always takes the same time, I think. And so the design process, yes. Of course, you know how it works. You know how to work and play around with Warp Studio as a tool, but the content really needs attention. So yes, it gets easier, but maybe not time-wise.
Okay. Thank you. I hope that was a satisfactory.
I hope so too.
I think we have a couple of more, so maybe I'll go over the last one that just showed up. So Jeanette says that she's wondering whether you use insights from behavioral sciences or psychology or human factors to inform the story and the interaction design and the post-VR discussions.
Ooh, that's a very interesting, difficult question, I would say. So I would say, to be honest, yeah, probably. That definitely behavioral sciences. So yes, thinking of that, we use a lot of, one of our dreams, to be honest, is, of course, you always have one character that you use, but we want to extend that, depending if you use like DISC or MBTI or behavioral typology or these type of tools. So we also want to use these type of tools to create maybe 4 scenarios of the same skill, but based on a different character. Definitely we think about that. So we always anticipate on a certain character with a certain preferred behavior, and how can we improve that on having someone else? So maybe someone with a preference for more red behavior acts differently than someone with a preference for blue behavior, if you understand what red and blue is, but it's more the action-oriented type or the more structured or detail-oriented type. So definitely we want to take that into account and into also the story creation. But that depends also a little bit on the budget we have available to develop new scenarios.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for a few more questions. I see that these two from Will and Thijs are like slightly similar. So they're asking whether you can share some more on the conversations that you have after the
yes.
trainings.
Yeah, so let me share one experience. So we were working with, this specifically works in teams where interpersonal skills are not so easy to discuss. For example, the IT environment. in the IT sector, which is of course very broad, so I generalize here a lot. But we had this IT team of a big bank, but also of in the media, another team, where the atmosphere in the team was super. It was super positive. So they collaborated in their own sense, in their own opinion, very well with each other. And then we say, but they still say, okay, can we improve? Can we grow from a good team to a high performing team? So yes, we bring people together in a classroom as a team. And then we let them experience our model, how to give constructive feedback. And for some reason, during the meaningful conversation after, so we let them first experience the role play. And then we always ask 2 questions to start off the discussion. One is, what have you become aware of yourself, or what have you learned? Secondly, okay, we now experienced a generic module on providing constructive feedback. What does that tell you? What does that tell about your feedback culture in your team? And although they had a very good collaboration and atmosphere, they discovered that because of that, they were afraid to give feedback to each other. So a very interesting conversation opened up, that one of the team members said to his boss, he said, you know what? You asked me 2 weeks ago to design something for you, and I worked on it for a whole week, and I was very passionate about it. But when I presented it to the management team, you decided in 5 seconds that it was nothing and you were not going to work with it. And I felt irritated about it, but I'm afraid to share it because I'm afraid to damage the relationship we have in the team. So suddenly that discussion opened up, and they discovered that being nice to each other works very well, but not always. So we also have to be courageous enough to share situations where we are not so satisfied, knowing that to grow towards a high-performing team, we have to open up and not pretend that everybody is, and everything is always excellent and great. So we have group discussions. You can also use it for individual coaching, of course. I also did that. But group discussions are very interesting. And only in 2 to 3 hours, in 2 sessions, we opened up a whole new world for that. So that's very interesting to see.
Yeah, that's a very interesting example. Thank you for sharing it.
All right.
I think that we have time for one last question briefly. So Daniel is asking, when you mentioned about a scene writer, whether this person knows about 360, so whether it is like a general scenario writer or maybe one that has experience in VR.
Well, I've only worked with one because we love him. So, so yes, he knows. But what these people know is how to they think in characters, and they think in scene writing, and so they know how to develop characters, and they know how to write responses. And so they created the storyline. And the storyline is just like in normal life, or just like in a 2D movie. And that's how the story develops. And yes, he knows about 360, but he knows about how to develop these variations on the responses, which is normally not in a movie where there's only one response, but this is a training scenario. Yeah, so yes, it's not so much about 360, but it's about the approach in learning more that you can develop. But that goes quite quickly to understand that in my experience.
Thank you very much, Ed, for being our guest speaker today. I think if any new questions are coming up in the chat, Ed is still here and he will be able to answer to them via the chat. So thank you again, Ed, and we hope to have you again as our guest in the future.
Always, Willie. No worries.